Police in Honolulu, Hawaii, responded to a parking lot near Pearl Ridge Center in Waimalu shortly after 10 a.m. on December the 22nd of 2023 and found 33-year-old Theresa Catela with fatal gunshot wounds. The Instagram influencer was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators first decided to begin searching for Theresa's estranged husband, Jason Catela. Soon after the search began, they found the 44-year-old's lifeless body 5 miles away from the mall in an area behind a Waipahu residence. The officers also found a gun on his person. Upon investigation, the police determined that Theresa had filed a restraining order against her husband. Her petition for the temporary order, which was filed on December the 8th of 2023, stated that Jason, who owned guns, had allegedly threatened to take his own life in front of his wife and her children on December the 6th. After that encounter, Jason returned to Theresa's home the next day and made similar threats. 2 weeks later, the temporary restraining order became official and the couple appeared in court on December the 20th. Under the agreement, Jason was prohibited from contacting Theresa Catela and was ordered to give up any firearms. It was not immediately clear how he was in possession of a gun in the shooting death of Theresa. The case was considered first-degree murder and other details of it remained unclear. In the wake of the ordeal, advocates of stronger protections for domestic violence victims reportedly raised concerns about the overall effectiveness of temporary restraining orders and protective orders when they could be so easily violated. Number 11. Patricia Isador. "She's swerving the car and I'm on top of the car," said Florida man Junior Francis to a 911 dispatcher as he clung to the hood of the vehicle being driven by his ex-girlfriend at 70 miles per hour. A glimpse of the incident, which unfolded on June the 24th of 2018, was recorded by another motorist who later posted the video on Twitter. The viral video showed Francis atop a Mercedes-Benz with 24-year-old Patricia Isador behind the wheel. Isador told a local news station that Francis had plenty of time to get off the car before she decided to barrel it down on I-95. She added that she'd driven off because Francis didn't want her to leave their Lauderhill home to pick up their daughter. Isador further stated that the man's threats made her fear what would happen if she stopped the car. Meanwhile, Francis told another station that both he and his ex-girlfriend had needed to use the vehicle, which he claimed they co-owned. The estranged couple, who were still living together, didn't come to a consensus on the issue. At that point, Isador got in the vehicle first and tried to leave, despite Francis jumping on the hood and holding on in an attempt to deter Isador from leaving. She still drove off. During the petrifying car ride, Francis hung onto the hood while Isador drove from Broward to Miami-Dade counties and back. The 22-year-old was able to call 911 and report the incident. Isador finally stopped on Ives Dairy Road in Miami, where Francis got off the hood of the car and joined her inside. They then drove to Southwest 39th Street and 32nd Avenue in West Park, where Francis managed to remove the key from the ignition. Law enforcement subsequently arrested Isador on a misdemeanor charge of culpable negligence. She was later released on bond. In the end, Francis told officers he didn't want to press charges against the woman and even refused to provide a statement. Number 10. Obra Readen. Three-time felon Obra Readen was being sentenced in a Las Vegas courtroom on January the 3rd of 2024 when he leaped over the bench and attacked the judge, causing her a minor head injury. Readen had appeared in Clark County District Court after being convicted of attempted battery with substantial bodily harm. His attorney had asked Judge Mary Kay Holtus for probation. The New York Post reported that the judge had something different in mind for the convict. During the court proceeding in question, Holtus said, "I think it's time he got a taste of something else," noting that Readen was a repeat offender. According to a criminal complaint, Readen suddenly rushed towards the judicial bench and jumped over it, Superman style, directly into Holtus's judicial space. With his arms outstretched, he tackled the 62-year-old to the floor and immediately grabbed her, pulling her hair and hitting her on the head. Several other individuals tried to intervene by wrestling with Readen, who was yelling profanities at Holtus. Court officers briefly dragged the man away, but he broke free and attempted to continue the onslaught as Holtus was still on the floor. Readen also attacked the court marshal, who sustained injuries that needed 25 stitches. After Readen was finally restrained, he was placed in solitary confinement. Court records indicated that he told officers that he'd attacked the judge because he was having a bad day. A week later, Readen went back to court wearing shackles, a spit mask on his face, and orange mitts on his hands. For his sentencing to resume, he was handed a 19 to 48-month jail sentence for his original case and was consequently charged with attempted murder for attacking Holtus. Due to the victim's age, the charge was enhanced. In addition to the newest charge, Readen was also facing a dozen other charges, including battery by a prisoner and battery on a protected person, which resulted in substantial bodily harm. The latest updates indicated that Readen was awaiting his preliminary hearing on the new charges. Number 9. Snapping at an Australian car park. In December of 2022, a car park brawl broke out between two Australian men, which ended with both of them helping each other to get back to their respective vehicles. The middle-aged men chose a busy shopping centre car park in a Brisbane suburb called The Gap as the site for their showdown. Dashcam video from a third vehicle caught the moment one of the males in question tried to leave his parking space. His Nissan Pathfinder was blocked in by a BMW. Apparently, the BMW was stuck due to the busy traffic in the parking area. At that point, the driver of the Nissan got out of his car and leaned through the BMW's sunroof, asking the driver to move. The BMW driver appeared to berate the other man for a moment, then leapt out of his sedan to confront him. The row erupted into violence when the pair exchanged blows and wrestled on the tarmac. The BMW driver pinned the other man on the ground and pointed angrily in his face. Right after, he helped his humbled opponent up and even scooped up the man's shades, which had fallen in the scuffle. He then reportedly returned to his BMW as if nothing had happened. The stunned driver of the Nissan appeared to take note of the BMW's registration plate. The traffic finally started to move and the BMW drove away. Local authorities have since said that they didn't receive any reports of the incident. Number 8. Kaylee Sanders. After being arrested for the shooting death of her brother, 21-year-old Colorado woman Kaylee Sanders told police that the victim wasn't the only individual she'd killed. The incident took place in the late hours of July the 27th of 2023, when the brother, Morgan Dane Salgado, came to their grandmother's Madison Street apartment in Cortez. When Sanders arrived at the residence, she was upset to learn that Salgado had drunk some of her beer. At approximately 1:28 a.m., the grandmother called 911 and reported that Sanders had shot Salgado in the head. Meanwhile, Sanders shouted that she needed help to get her dead brother away from her, calling him narcissistic, abusive. 2 officers from the Cortez Police Department quickly responded to the scene and advised the grandmother to come toward them outside the apartment. As the old woman approached the officers, Sanders walked outside with a gun in her hand. Despite the officers repeatedly commanding Sanders to drop the gun, she didn't comply and even pointed the pistol in their direction before firing one shot into the air. While the officers took cover, Sanders absconded. One of the officers proceeded to enter the apartment and found Salgado dead on the couch with a beer bottle in front of him. Shortly after 3 a.m., Sanders was located on South Broadway, and she was still in possession of the firearm, later identified as a Colt 45. Police spotted her and ordered her to drop the gun several times. Nevertheless, Sanders didn't concede. Officers peppered her with beanbag shots and made the arrest. An affidavit indicated that after Sanders' Miranda rights were read, she faintly whispered about having illegal drugs in her system. Later that morning, Detective Lieutenant John Hargraves of the Montezuma County Sheriff's Office received a call from 24-year-old Tiana Gallegos regarding another shooting. Hargraves spoke with Gallegos, who revealed that she and Sanders had gone to a residence at 18661 Colorado Highway belonging to one Lewis Wall 2 days earlier. It was unclear what the relationship between the three was, but Gallegos said that they were at the location to gather firewood. The next morning, the pair went out to get the wood. Upon their return, they ate inside the residence, and shortly after, Gallegos went outside to split wood with her headphones on. She said that moments later she saw Sanders walk outside with a gun in her hand. Sanders allegedly demanded her help to find Wall's car keys and told her not to panic when they entered the house. Gallegos then saw Wall in a semi-upright position on the sofa, grunting. At that point, Sanders demanded to see Gallegos' phone and drove her to Cortez after finding Wall's keys. She purportedly kept the gun on her lap and sometimes in her hands. As they traveled, they later ditched the vehicle. According to Detective Hargraves, Gallegos couldn't get away from Sanders because of the gun. He said that they have yet to eliminate Gallegos as a suspect. Upon receiving the information from Gallegos, a sergeant from the sheriff's office promptly conducted a welfare check at Wall's home, where they found the 66-year-old man lifeless on the living room floor. In the immediate aftermath of Sanders' arrest, Sanders claimed that Wall had tried getting his hands down her pants. Ultimately, Sanders faced 9 charges in connection with the 2 incidents. The charges included first-degree murder, second-degree murder, assault, kidnapping, menacing, and automobile theft. Her arraignment took place on November the 14th of 2023 at Montezuma County Combined Courts. As of the latest updates, proceedings are ongoing. Number 7. Noel Fay. On August the 23rd of 2016, 43-year-old Noel Fay drove through a Safeway grocery store in Springfield, Oregon, after store employees didn't sell her gift cards. At around 4 p.m. on the day in question, Fay went to the store located at 1891 Pioneer Parkway East and tried to buy $2,200 worth of gift cards with a check. Her check would not clear and she couldn't buy the gift cards. Employees told police that Fay drove back to the store after midnight, yelling about wanting her cards. When one of the employees asked her to move her car so they could discuss the transaction, she instead drove her vehicle through the west doors. Upon forcibly entering the building, she turned down an aisle towards the back of the store and reversed back to the cash registers and turned towards the deli area. She then drove out through the other set of doors on the east side of the building and sped away. At the time, there were 6 people in the store. Fortunately, nobody was injured. Local police later found Fay's car abandoned about a mile away from the scene shortly after they arrested her at her Glenwood home. Following the incident, Fay's family said that Fay suffered from bipolar disorder. The suspect would later tell local news that her manic episode resulted after her doctor adjusted her medication. In December of 2016, Judge Mustafa Kasselbai found Fay guilty except for insanity on charges of recklessly endangering another person, unlawful use of a weapon, reckless driving, and first-degree criminal mischief. Kasselbai later issued a ruling that assigned supervision of the defendant to a local psychiatric security review board. Number 6. Chen Goan. 46-year-old Chinese man Chen Goan launched a gruesome stabbing attack on his wife Han Hongli outside a Beach Road restaurant in Singapore, prompting bystanders to intervene. The incident took place shortly after 5 p.m. on April the 14th of 2022 at the Chongqing Steamboat, where Han was working. After a colleague told her that a man was outside looking for her, Han went out. She said that it was her husband, and when she approached him, he caught her by the hair and started attacking her with a knife. Han was reportedly seen begging for her life as Chen hacked at her repeatedly. As the ordeal unfolded, a handful of kitchen staff attempted to intervene, throwing nearby objects in a desperate attempt to stop Chen. The suspect consequently retreated. Video footage of the attack showed the victim bleeding from multiple knife wounds. The man was said to have cut his own wrists and neck during the incident, while his wife suffered 40 slash wounds, a severed finger, and a fully blinded left eye. Responding police arrived at the scene and subsequently located the suspect nearby. Although the motive of the gruesome attack was unclear, Chen was taken into custody and charged with attempted murder. He received medical treatment at the Tang Tok Seng Hospital, where Han was also treated. Han's injuries cost her around $35,000 in medical bills, according to Edmund Tan, her employer. Tan said that Han underwent several surgeries and was traumatized in the aftermath. Number 5. Road rage in Mexico. In December of 2018, a video that showed a woman smashing a Volkswagen with a metal pipe before using her own car to drive into the vehicle in question circulated online. The violent incident was caught on camera by a witness in Mexico City, Mexico. Local media reported about the attack, saying that the woman's road rage meltdown began immediately after she was involved in a crash with the Volkswagen. In the video, the woman could be seen shattering the windshield of the Volkswagen with the pipe, then repeatedly striking the side view mirror of the vehicle. After breaking off the mirror, she went back into her own vehicle, turned it around and drove into the side of the Volkswagen several times. Tires were heard screeching and onlookers screamed for her to stop as she caused increasing damage to both vehicles. With each collision, she was also placing herself and the driver of the Volkswagen in increasing physical peril. Although local authorities opened an investigation in the wake of the incident, it was unclear if any charges or arrests were made. Number 4. Dante Leemont Nunley. While reportedly in the throes of a multi-day drug binge in mid-2021, Dante Leemont Nunley bit off his girlfriend's chin as part of a vicious attack. In an interview with KWTV, the victim, Carrie Johnson, said that Nunley had gone into a rage while they were inside her car with her rescue dog. Johnson explained how the man's eyes, voice, and demeanor changed moments before the grisly assault began. She added that when Nunley snapped, she tried getting out of the vehicle, but he pulled her back in and started to push her down. Johnson began having difficulty breathing, which set off her service dog. The alarmed Pooch bit Nunley, putting a stop to the violence. At some point, Johnson reportedly got out of the car and left Nunley to drive away alone. When the suspect was arrested, police found him in possession of a firearm that had been hidden inside the vehicle. Nunley was later sentenced to time served and an additional 10-year supervised release after pleading guilty to domestic abuse by strangulation and maiming. The 39-year-old was apprehended again on May the 15th of 2023 due to the fact that he'd failed to appear for 3 consecutive court hearings on an unrelated case. He posted a $2,000 bond and was released. When he later failed to show up for a subsequent hearing, the posted bond was forfeited and a warrant for his arrest was issued. An Oklahoma County deputy tracked Nunley to a homeless camp where he was taken into custody without incident. Number 3. Tyler Graves. After crashing his vehicle into a residence in Lake Forest, California, 32-year-old Tyler Graves went to another house and used a pickaxe to hack his way into a bedroom. The chaos transpired at around 12 p.m. on May the 22nd of 2023. Surveillance video captured a Kia sedan speeding down the quiet street before crashing into a house. The mother of the family living at the home in question told Eyewitness News that her children were in the garage at the time, but they were uninjured. Security cameras then showed Graves running down the street in the direction of another residence where he was a tenant. At some point, Graves grabbed a pickaxe from the backyard of that home and not only chased one of his co-tenants, but also hacked at another roommate's door for several minutes. From inside his bedroom, the roommate screamed for help and called 911. Meanwhile, Graves kept hitting the door. When he started getting tired, the roommate reportedly swung the door open, disarmed him, and tried to calm him down. At that point, Orange County deputies arrived at the scene and initially thought that the roommate was the attacker. The unnamed roommate said that when he was told to drop the axe, he immediately complied with them and got down on the ground. But Graves came up behind him and picked up the makeshift weapon. Deputies subdued Graves and took him into custody. They believed that the suspect was under the influence of some substance. In the immediate aftermath, Graves was hospitalized for injuries he'd sustained from the crash. Fortunately, no one else was injured during the incident. Graves was held behind bars on charges of assault with a deadly weapon, as well as brandishing a weapon, resisting arrest, and hit and run with property damage. Today's topic was requested by Candice Vedito. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Heaven Connor. On April the 4th of 2019, officials in Stafford County arrested a woman after she broke into a local daycare in Fredericksburg, Virginia, without any clothes on. The Stafford County Sheriff's Office had received a report shortly after 5 a.m. that morning from an employee of the Kids on the Move Learning Center at 628 Cambridge Street. That employee said that while she was engrossed in her work, turning lights on near a classroom doorway, she was suddenly confronted by a naked woman. The birthday suit break-in artist was later identified as Heaven Connor, aged 23. Connor falsely accused the employee of trespassing and inexplicably told her she was fired. Upon the officers' arrival, they determined that Connor had no affiliation with the daycare, so they took her into custody. Connor told them that they were making a mistake because she was the daycare owner's wife. One of the arresting officers recognized the suspect. She'd been reported as a suspicious person after witnesses saw her walking down Route 1 hours earlier. In the aftermath, the suspect was facing charges including unauthorized entry and indecent exposure, but was released on bond. The following day, she landed behind bars once more after she was accused of pulling a man's pants down at a convenience store's restroom. The sheriff's office released a statement saying that Connor had been in a bathroom stall where she reached out and began tugging on the victim's pants. She was booked into the Rappahannock Regional Jail, where she was held without bond on charges of assault and battery. If you are only just getting warmed up, then stick around after number 1 to watch our compilation about when bickering and arguing spirals out of control. Number 1. Barbara Stange Alvarez. On November the 25th of 2020, Englishwoman Barbara Stange Alvarez went on a rampage at a supermarket in Stevenage and broke hundreds of liquor bottles during what TMZ called coronavirus craziness. Stange Alvarez had gone to the Aldi store located on Fairlands Way. While waiting in the checkout line, she was seen acting erratically. When another shopper told her to calm down, the situation devolved into chaos as Stange Alvarez started walking along the aisle, using her arm to sweep several containers of booze from the shelves. She sent hundreds of bottles crashing onto the floor and cost the store thousands of dollars in damages. At one point, she slipped and slashed her right hand, but continued her frenzy with her left. Consequently, a security guard from another establishment came to the shop and detained the woman until the police arrived. After being taken into custody, Stange Alvarez received treatment at Lister Hospital. There, she continued acting out, even going as far as kicking a security guard in the shin and hurling racial insults. Ultimately, the 36-year-old was handed a 12-week jail sentence, suspended for 18 months after pleading guilty to criminal damage, racially aggravated common assault, and racially aggravated public order offenses. She was also ordered to undergo mental health treatment programs for a designated period in time and pay more than $6,000 in compensation to Aldi, plus court costs of at least $100. Stange Alvarez, who represented herself in court, said she felt she was suffering from mental health issues because she'd been unable to work during the lockdown. Number 7. David Anthony. 51-year-old Florida woman Gretchen Anthony was last seen in March of 2020 at her home in Jupiter. The previous month, she and her husband, David, jointly sought divorce. On March the 21st, the day after Gretchen had disappeared, neighbors reported hearing a blood-curdling scream coming from the home. Video footage from the couple's garage showed a blood-stained water jug and the back of the head of someone who was not moving, fitting Gretchen's appearance. Neighbors also reported a smell of chemicals emanating from the garage. The police found her Mini Cooper parked at the Jupiter Medical Center, with surveillance footage indicating 43-year-old David had been the one to park it there on March the 24th. The vehicle would later show traces of blood on the gearshift and steering wheel. Around the same time, 5 people received messages from Gretchen's number claiming she was quarantining after being diagnosed with a severe case of COVID-19. David was arrested a week later in Las Cruces, New Mexico. He ultimately confessed to killing Gretchen and told the authorities where they could find her body. David agreed to be sentenced to 38 years in prison following a plea deal. Number 6. Mohammed Shamji. 2 days after she filed for divorce on November the 30th of 2016, Dr. Ilana Frick from Toronto was killed by her husband. She had been the victim of extended emotional, verbal, and physical abuse at the hands of her husband, Dr. Mohammed Shamji. Roughly a year after they were married in 2005, Shamji was charged with assault for threatening to kill Frick and their infant daughter. The couple reconciled, but under the conditions that Shamji continued to undergo therapy and wasn't allowed to own any weapons. The relationship continued to deteriorate, and Frick would attempt to end the marriage on multiple occasions, but was dissuaded by her husband's promises of improvement. Lawyers commenting on the case argued that given the history of domestic abuse, the divorce papers shouldn't have been handed down while the couple was still living together. 2 days later, they got into a heated argument. As their 3 children slept, Shamji brutally beat Frick, breaking the woman's ribs and neck before strangling her to death. He packed her remains in a suitcase, drove a few miles north of the city, and dumped them in the Humber River. The following morning, Shamji, a world-renowned neurosurgeon with a master in science from Yale University, returned to his workplace at Toronto Western Hospital to perform spinal surgeries. In 2019, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with a chance of parole after a minimum of 14 years served. Number 5. Ibrahim Gazal. In early February of 2021, Ibrahim Gazal murdered his wife, beauty queen Zina Kanjo, in Beirut, Lebanon. Kanjo was found dead at the couple's marital home in the Ain El Mrassir district. An investigation determined that she'd been fatally strangled months after she'd filed a domestic abuse complaint against her husband. It's believed that she was in the process of getting a divorce from him. An arrest warrant was issued for Gazal, who in the meantime had fled to Turkey. The country's authorities pledged their cooperation with the investigation, while the report against Gazal was relayed to Interpol departments all over the world. In a phone call with his sister-in-law, Rita, which was then made public by the Lebanese Al Jadid TV channel, he didn't give a straight answer but seemed on the verge of a confession. He told Rita, "I didn't want to. I didn't want her to die," claiming that he'd put his hands on Kanjo's mouth to stop her from screaming. In December of 2014, Lebanon had amended its domestic violence law to include marital violence, a decision welcomed by the country's women's rights activists. However, it wasn't made clear if the amendment also protected divorced women, potentially providing a legal loophole. Kanjo was one of 3 women that were killed by men in Lebanon that month. In the ensuing uproar, numerous social media users added #ZinaKanjo to their posts to raise awareness about the domestic violence that women faced in the country. Number 4. Michael Rita. On December the 15th of 2019, Englishman Michael Rita gunned down his wife after being ordered to pay a 5-figure sum in a divorce settlement. 70-year-old Rita had met Marion Price via the internet in 2012, and within a week, the woman reportedly told her friends that she'd made a mistake. An abusive relationship ensued, with Price's family claiming that Rita gradually revealed himself to be manipulative, controlling, and obsessed with money. In 2017, he left Price stranded in London when he became enraged that she'd gotten up and danced at a Jersey Boys musical. He attacked his wife's elderly mother after she'd moved back in with her, when Price told him she would no longer pay his bills. Following their separation, Rita placed a tracker on his wife's car and threatened to kill her if she left him. After the court order was pronounced and Rita had to cover the financial costs associated with the divorce, amounting to £10,000, Price became fearful for her life. As she sat in her car outside her home in Earls Barton, Northamptonshire, Rita rode past on a motorbike. Armed with a shotgun, he opened fire on the grandmother of 3 in what would subsequently be described as a cold-blooded execution. The 63-year-old died from her injuries and Rita was sentenced to 31 years in prison. His best friend, Stephen Welch, was given a sentence of 27 years as a willing assistant to the crime for helping Rita dispose of the evidence. The shotgun and motorbike were never recovered. Number 3. Todd Smith. In 2012, after a 7-year-long marriage, Illinois woman Katrina Smith made the decision to divorce her husband, Todd. 30-year-old Katrina was a stepmother to Todd's 3 children and had a successful job in human resources. She didn't tell him about her intentions and confided in her married colleague, Guy Gabriel. She'd come to support Todd, an insurance and investment broker, as well as his children, after he'd been accused of fraud by his partners. This aspect put a considerable strain on their marriage. Katrina and Gabriel's friendship turned into a love affair, and she was even more committed to leave her husband. She moved into a friend's apartment and told those close to her that she planned on getting a divorce. Unbeknownst to her, Todd had placed a tracker on her car and had become aware of the affair. Katrina went missing on October the 23rd of 2012. Todd made emotional TV pleas for her safe return on a daily basis, while his community in Winnebago County stood by him and banded together to look for Katrina. Her abandoned car was discovered about 2 miles from her home with traces of blood inside it and bloodied paper towels nearby. 3 weeks after her disappearance, the woman's badly decomposed body was found in a river, and the authorities determined she'd been murdered, having suffered devastating blunt force trauma. By that point, Todd had already become the prime suspect. The police discovered the GPS program he'd used to monitor his wife, as well as the aluminium baseball bat with traces of her blood on it in their garage. Prosecutors would argue that Katrina had gone to the house to do some laundry and told Todd that she wanted a divorce. It's unclear if he'd confronted her about the affair before striking her 24 times with the baseball bat, landing several deadly blows to her head. He then drove her car to dispose of the remains and wiped it down to cover his tracks. After killing her, Todd sent the woman a harrowing text message, which read, "Sweet dreams, I love you." A jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated domestic battery, and concealing a homicidal death. He was sentenced to 55 years for the murder with an additional 4 years for concealment. It likely meant that Todd, who was in his late 40s at the time, would die in prison. Number 2. Hilmi Ymas. In September of 2019, a Turkish man murdered his wife in a frenzied attack in the province of Antalya. 44-year-old Hilmi Ymas and Gulseren, 12 years his junior, had been married for 15 years. Gulseren had made a decision to divorce her husband and run away with their 2 children. The reasons behind their marital problems are unclear, although it's suspected to have been due to Hilmi's abusive and controlling behavior. She went to her father's house, where Hilmi tracked her down on September the 26th. Gulseren, who reportedly had a restraining order against him, refused to let Hilmi inside. He broke onto the property and chased her into a field as she fled. It was there that Hilmi took Gulseren down and stabbed her over a dozen times in the chest. She later succumbed to her injuries in a local hospital. Afterwards, he called his father-in-law to say he'd murdered his daughter and turned himself in on the same day, still wearing a shirt drenched in the victim's blood. Hilmi told the court that he wouldn't have killed his wife had she agreed to return home. His trial is ongoing. Number 1. Nengami Van. Nengami Van met his wife Nali when she was in her late teens. The Wisconsin couple got married shortly thereafter and had 7 children over the course of a relationship that lasted 25 years. Trouble arose in their marriage, stemming from Nengami's excessive spending, heavy drinking, and interactions with other women. Nevertheless, it was he who filed for divorce in 2015 and moved out of the family house. He was hoping for a quick settlement by using the Hmong clan system to carry out the divorce, which would have essentially involved both their families accepting the marriage's finality. Nali, who sought better legal security towards receiving child support payments and custody, opted for the court system. In late 2015, Nengami threatened that something bad would happen if Nali didn't stop requesting alimony. On March the 22nd of 2017, he went to the Marathon Savings Bank, where his wife worked, and demanded she sign the divorce papers. He reportedly told her in Hmong, "Do you want to die now?" before heading towards his car. Nali knew he carried a handgun in the vehicle and fled to a nearby Subway restaurant. As Nengami returned to the bank, it's believed he was confronted by bank tellers Diane Look, aged 67, and 62-year-old Karen Barkley, Nali's longtime friends and colleagues. He shot them both, inflicting fatal injuries. Nengami then drove to the offices of Talusti, Kennedy, and Dirks. He held 2 people at gunpoint and demanded to see Nali's attorney, 43-year-old Sarah Quirt San. He briefly confronted a woman before shooting her dead. Nengami then returned to his apartment in Weston. As the police set up a perimeter, Nengami fatally shot 40-year-old detective Jason Wieland, an 18-year-old law enforcement veteran. The shooting led to a 3-hour standoff. The police cut off power to the apartment, then tore down part of its exterior wall with an armored car. Nengami fired a warning shot. An officer, who was reported to have seen him with the weapon, fired more than 24 rounds into the home, fatally injuring Nengami. Number 10. Anastasia King. Anastasia King from Kyrgyzstan was only 18 years old when she met 36-year-old Indel King Jr. from Washington State. Anastasia had been introduced to Indel through a mail-order matchmaking service. Indel, a University of Chicago graduate, came across as a charming man, but soon turned out to be a textbook abuser. He had initially made a good impression and won over Anastasia's parents, but after their wedding, he turned into an aggressive, controlling monster. He pressured Anastasia to have children right away. He also demanded she tell him her location at all times, didn't allow her to get her driving license, and told her he'd kill her if she ever left him. Anastasia was also forced to take up work as a waitress, as Indel had lied about his income. He reportedly funneled her earnings into his own pockets. Predictably, the relationship spiraled downwards, and Anastasia began contemplating getting a divorce. She'd been married to Indel for 2 years, which meant she could apply for permanent residency in the United States. However, Indel didn't want the divorce, having previously lost $55,000 while divorcing his previous wife, another mail-order bride. He plotted to have Anastasia killed, enlisting the help of Daniel Larson, a 21-year-old boarder who lived in their house. Anastasia was last seen alive in September of 2000. Upon returning from a trip to Kyrgyzstan, Anastasia was lured by Indel into the garage of their home, where he then grabbed her tightly. Larson tied a necktie round her neck and Indel strangled her with it. Larson later testified against Indel when offered a plea bargain for second-degree murder. In December of 2000, he led investigators to the site where Anastasia had been buried in a shallow grave. Indel received a 28-year prison sentence for Anastasia's murder. Number 9. Elena Barakina. Elena Barakina, a young Ukrainian woman, met David Sartin from Texas through a website promising Western men beautiful Russian and Ukrainian brides. Sartin and Barakina began seeing each other, with Sartin flying to Barakina's home country 6 times. He sent her tens of thousands of dollars in money and in gifts, such as expensive gold and diamond jewelry. He also helped fund her singing career. Anything she wanted, Sartin provided. However, when Sartin learned that she was cheating on him and sleeping with her former boyfriend, he hatched a plot to have her shipped over from Kiev in a crate. He planned to then imprison Barakina in his home and slowly poison her to death with lead. David hired who he thought were members of a Russian gang to do the job for him, but it later turned out that he was talking to federal agents, executing a sting operation. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Number 8. Oxana Marova. Oxana Marova, originally from the Ukraine, hit it off with Carl, a Florida physician in his 50s, at a mail-order bride mixer in the city of Odessa. Oxana was a single mother with a 2-year-old, and she was looking to ensure that her child had the best possible future ahead of him. When Oxana and Carl met, even Oxana's parents told her not to pass up the opportunity to be with him. It was only after the pair moved back to the United States that she would discover who he really was. Carl had pretended to be a kind family man who'd promised the world to Oxana and her son, but he was revealed to be a controlling abuser. He wanted children immediately, even purchasing ovulation kits so that he could track Oxana's fertility. He went as far as to dye Oxana's child's hair so that it more closely resembled his own. Carl soon began isolating Oxana from her family and friends and threatened to have her child deported if she didn't obey him. On one occasion, at a Walmart, Carl punished Oxana's child so harshly that social services were called. Oxana took the opportunity to tell them everything, and they helped her to escape the marriage safely. Number 7. Raina Sheski. Raina Sheski was a Filipino mail-order bride who went missing in 2005. She had recently married Gary Sheski, an American with a long history of abusing women. In 2008, hikers in Castle Rock State Park, California, came across a skull. 2 years later, it was identified as Raina's. Sheski's daughter confessed to authorities that she had aided her father in disposing of Raina's body after he'd strangled her. His daughter was just 19 years old at the time. The rest of Raina's remains are undiscovered, and Sheski was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his crimes. Number 6. Susanna Remirata. In 1991, Susanna Remirata met Timothy Blackwell through a mail-order bride catalog. After a couple of years, the pair was married in Remirata's hometown in the Philippines. Just 10 days later, the marriage ended in divorce proceedings as Blackwell had beaten and choked Remirata. During the divorce trial, Remirata, who was pregnant from a previous relationship, was shot and killed by Blackwell in the courthouse lobby. Blackwell was apprehended immediately and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Number 5. Io. Io, a Vietnamese mail-order bride, married Chinese man Lai Bing Hao in Guangdong, China. Bing Hao had purchased Io for just over $4,000, and less than 1 year after marriage, Io gave birth to twins. Bing Hao's mother moved in with the couple to help look after the baby boys, but things soon took a turn for the worse. Io and 3 Vietnamese men tied up and strangled both Bing Hao and his mother to death. Lai Shi-hu, Bing Hao's father, discovered them. Io had fled with the twins to a nearby town, and she was caught less than 24 hours later. She was arrested on suspicion of murder while reportedly attempting to sell the babies for $9,000 each. Number 4. Jerry Mensel. Jerry Mensel was 69 years old when he lost his wife of 43 years to cancer. He became lonely and eventually met 24-year-old Valentina, a Moroccan mail-order bride, online. Mensel brought Valentina to the US and proposed to her, but Valentina had other plans. She demanded that he send $32,000 to her brother-in-law in London. Mensel obliged, and the two married shortly thereafter. Their marriage ended less than 2 weeks later, and suddenly Mensel was in the middle of a divorce. He had to pay Valentina alimony and overall lost around $100,000. Valentina, believed now to be an alias, is said to be back in Morocco, and federal agents are investigating the incident, as it may be linked to an international organized crime ring. Number 3. Albani. Albani was a 26-year-old engineer from Ukraine who'd become the mail-order bride of an American man named Lester Bani, who was 30 years her senior. The marriage between the two eventually failed, with Alla filing a restraining order against Lester. She also gained custody of their 4-year-old son, Daniel. One day, Alla picked up her son from school and was strapping him into the car seat when Lester attacked her with a knife. She bled to death in front of her son. Lester tried to claim the murder as self-defense, but the court saw through his story and he was sentenced to life in prison. Number 2. Emilia Villa. Emilia, a Filipino mail-order bride, met her husband through an agency when she was just 18. She was paired up with Jack Reeves, who was 46 years old at the time and a retired Army Master Sergeant. The couple went through 8 years of turmoil in their marriage before Emilia finally decided she'd had enough. She started making plans to leave him, but was murdered by Reeves before she got the opportunity to do so. Her body was found in Lake Whitney, a place where Jack's previous mail-order bride had allegedly drowned. In 1996, Jack Reeves was found guilty of the murder of Emilia, as well as having murdered his previous wife, Sharon. Number 1. William Chase Hargrove. In April of 2017, the body of 27-year-old Anna Repkina was found outside the lumber town of Elsie in Oregon, judging by her mangled remains. The authorities determined that she'd been killed via a shotgun blast to the head. The only lead available to the police was the name Kevin Thomas, found on a receipt in a takeout bag near the corpse. They followed up on it and interviewed the man in question. From that point on, a sinister murder plot began to unravel. Days before Repkina's body was found, Thomas had shared a KFC meal with 29-year-old William Chase Hargrove, who'd also asked to borrow his shotgun. The police uncovered that Repkina, a Moscow native, had been lured by Hargrove to the US with the promise of marriage. At the time, Hargrove was in an open relationship with a woman named Michelle Chavez. When it became clear that Repkina would be permanently moving to the US as Hargrove's wife, Chavez became jealous and gave the man an ultimatum, asking him to choose between them. Hargrove told Chavez that he was loyal to her even though Repkina, his fiancée, was still living with him. Chavez pressured him to get rid of the other woman. Consequently, on April the 16th, he took Repkina to the woods and shot her in the head. The murder weapon was found in his car and cell phone tracking placed him at the scene. Hargrove was arrested and sentenced to life in prison. Number 7. Jessica Strom. In October of 2014, Wisconsin man John Shelfeffer, then in his early 50s, told a media outlet that he still loved his former fiancée, even though she'd allegedly tried to have him killed. He and Jessica Strom had met 7 years prior at a bar where she was waiting tables. They were both divorcees and a romantic relationship developed. It was turbulent at times, but it endured, as Strom and her children eventually moved in with Shelfeffer. Over the course of their relationship, both had accused each other of being abusive. Strom filed a restraining order against Shelfeffer, while he reported that her violence towards him ranged from punches to stomping on his foot with a high-heeled spiked shoe. A culmination and confirmation of their tumultuous romance came during a restraining order hearing, when Shelfeffer proposed to Strom in front of a judge and she accepted. Even so, in February of 2014, the 33-year-old met up with a former classmate at a cafe in Warsaw. Strom offered intercourse and $1,000 to the 24-year-old would-be hitman. She told him to buy a gun off the street and to blow his brains out, in reference to her fiancé, even suggesting he use a potato as a suppressor. Unbeknownst to Strom, the man she'd approached about the killing was actually an informant for the local police department. He contacted the authorities and the woman was arrested. She claimed that the entire conversation was meant as a joke and a form of drunken venting, but nonetheless accepted a plea for solicitation to commit first-degree intentional homicide. Strom would spend at least 3.5 years in prison. She was also interviewed by the media and said that she still loved Shelfeffer and she would have never gone through with the murder plot. The targeted fiancé echoed the same sentiment, referring to the incident as Strom's mental drama and proposing that instead of prison, she be sent to a mental health facility. Number 6. Colton Barnes. In July of 2020, a Nebraska man was arrested on charges of first-degree murder, animal cruelty, child abuse, and tampering with evidence. Colton Barnes and Kayla Matulka had gotten engaged in March and were due to get married mid-fall. The nature of the domestic argument that occurred at their Malmo home remains unclear, but at one point, Barnes was asked to leave the residence. By his own admission, he'd sent the victim a text message, which he then deleted from her phone, threatening to kick the door down. After regaining entrance to the home, Barnes forcefully and repeatedly stabbed his 27-year-old fiancée and her dog, a black Labrador named Diesel, before fleeing the premises. Both succumbed to their extensive injuries. Matulka had 2 children to whom Barnes would have become a stepfather. The murder scene was discovered by the victim's 11-year-old son, who then ran to a nearby home and asked the neighbor for help, telling him that he thought his mother was dead. A 911 call was placed at around 9:30 a.m. Footage from a surveillance camera pointed to Barnes as the main suspect, and he was arrested a few hours later. Upon being taken into custody, he told the officers, "I wish I could have stopped myself." He was held without bond at Saunders County Jail. In spite of the substantial evidence against him, Barnes pleaded not guilty. His trial is ongoing. Number 5. Dominic Evans. In January of 2019, an Englishman allegedly fell asleep behind the wheel and crashed his car, resulting in the death of his fiancée. Kaylee Gill and Dominic Evans, both in their early 20s, had been together since their early teens and planned to get married the following year. The couple had 2 children who were in the back seat at the time of the crash. They'd just returned from a family holiday to Egypt and were traveling on the M5 near Columpton, Devon. Their Nissan Juke was seen veering across the motorway before crashing into a lorry. 22-year-old Gill was the only one to be extracted from the wreckage in critical condition, as Evans and the children hadn't suffered serious injuries. The young woman was taken to Derriford Hospital, where she passed away 4 days later. Evans, who reportedly had no memory of the accident, subsequently appeared at Exeter Crown Court, where he admitted to causing death by careless driving. He was given a 12-month driving ban and a jail sentence of 8 months, suspended for 2 years. Number 4. Kendrick Akins. In early January of 2020, just days after proposing to his girlfriend, a Houston man shot and killed her, following an argument about car issues. Kendrick Akins and Dominic Jefferson, both in their 30s, had been dating for about 3 months before he proposed to her on New Year's Eve. Jefferson and an unnamed woman were outside the couple's home and getting ready to pick up the latter's boyfriend from work. Jefferson's car wouldn't start, and as Akins came outside to ask about the issue, his fiancée shouted at him not to touch her car. In the rapidly escalating argument, Akins reached for his gun. According to eyewitness reports, his fiancée dared him to shoot her. He then pointed the weapon at Jefferson's chest and fired a single round, killing her. A neighbor heard the gunshot and, as he approached the scene, encountered Jefferson, who fired once in his direction. The neighbor survived by diving into nearby bushes and playing dead, hoping that the shooter wouldn't return. Akins fled the scene after grabbing his fiancée's cell phone and was later arrested. He had 2 prior convictions in Harris County for aggravated assault and felon in possession of a weapon. Akins asked to be put in protective custody as the victim had brothers in the county jail and he feared retaliation. He was charged with murder and aggravated assault with a combined bond set at $225,000. Number 3. Philip Keller. In May of 2021, MMA fighter Philip Keller of Florida was arrested and charged with first-degree premeditated murder after shooting his fiancée while high on MDMA. 39-year-old Keller was known in the MMA community after competing under the Titan FC banner, where he suffered 3 losses from 2019 to 2020. He'd called 911 at around 11 a.m. to report that his girlfriend, Alicia Red Campitelli, was not breathing and that someone had possibly broken into their apartment. 35-year-old Campitelli, a well-known local piercing artist, was already dead as first responders arrived at the scene. She had been shot twice, and hours before Keller called 911, at least one resident reported hearing the sound of gunshots. Surveillance footage would show Keller making multiple withdrawals using Campitelli's debit card after he'd killed her. The fighter then called an acquaintance and shared details of the murder, including where he'd disposed of the gun. The acquaintance contacted investigators, who set up a monitored phone call. Keller was recorded saying, "I killed her, bro," and went on to mention he was severely intoxicated at the time of the murder. After the authorities heard the confession, and as deputies were closing in on Keller, he attempted to evade arrest by jumping into a creek on Merritt Island, but was ultimately taken into custody. Number 2. Alexander Voronin. Mere days before their wedding, Russian man Alexander Voronin brutally murdered his fiancée, 26-year-old Marina Pankratova. She had already bought her wedding dress and was prepared to spend the rest of her life with the same man who would violently end it. In 2020, the woman's half-naked body was found at the Moscow apartment they shared, where Voronin had subjected her to what was reported as a 3-hour-long onslaught. Her face was disfigured and her skull was fractured by dozens of strikes with an unidentified object, suspected to have been the blunt part of an axe. Her limbs were covered in wounds, some of which had been inflicted by punches and kicks. Voronin's mother was the one who discovered the gruesome killing. In the ensuing investigation, CCTV footage showed the 25-year-old beating Pankratova before they got home, and no one else was seen entering the apartment prior to him leaving it. The police interviewed 5 of the man's former partners, all of whom claimed he'd been abusive. One woman reported that in a fit of rage, he tied her to a chair and threatened to throw her child out the window. Voronin, a travel agent, had initially tried to flee abroad, but was prevented from leaving Russia by pandemic travel restrictions. He was persuaded to surrender by his father, Nikolay, an ex-KGB security service officer. Voronin, who in court claimed that he didn't remember anything, was ultimately sentenced to 14.5 years in prison. Number 1. James Addy. In 2018, the body of Molly Watson was found on a gravel road in Monroe County, Missouri. She'd been shot, execution style, in the back of the head. In April of that year, she was supposed to marry her fiancé, James Addy, whom she'd been dating for 7 years. However, it would have been an illegal union, as Addy, a man in his 50s, was still married to Melanie, his wife of 23 years, with whom he shared a daughter. For years he'd been living a double life, and his family was completely unaware of his 35-year-old fiancé's existence. Then, as he became a murder suspect, his family man facade unraveled. A blood-spattered t-shirt was found at the scene, covered in Watson's DNA. It was an instrumental piece of evidence, as Emma, Addy's daughter, told investigators that she'd made the t-shirt, effectively tying him to the killing. Tire marks at the scene matched Addy's vehicle, and an empty box of ammunition retrieved from the same area was identified by a firearms expert as matching ammo found in his home. During his trial, Addy, who maintained his innocence, put forward a story about an ex of Watson's who'd supposedly been stalking her and who could have been responsible for her death. No evidence was presented in support of his allegations. A prosecutor argued that Addy's actions destroyed 2 families, the family of his victim, Molly Watson, and his own. He was sentenced in July of 2021 to life in prison plus a decade.
Number 8. Shadina Smith. On January the 16th of 2021, Shadina Smith had just left her New York City apartment in West 150th Street, near Frederick Douglass Boulevard, when she was accosted by a young man. He allegedly groped her, to which Smith reacted by returning home and telling her fiancé, 26-year-old Josh Hall. The couple rushed outside and confronted the aggressor, later identified as Musa Cisse, aged 19, in the lobby of the apartment building. Hall reportedly punched him in the face, and Cisse retaliated by brandishing a weapon and opening fire on the couple. 29-year-old Smith was struck 3 times in the chest, while Hall was shot in the shoulder and abdomen. The couple were rushed to Harlem Hospital, where Hall was stabilized while Smith passed away. The deadly broad daylight shooting prompted an international manhunt for Cisse, whom the authorities initially suspected had fled to West Africa. 10 months after the incident, he was found behind the wheel of a stolen car on Riverside Drive in Sugar Hill. Cisse initially gave officers a fake name, but NYPD detectives soon realized he was the suspect for whom they'd been searching in connection to Smith's killing. Following his arrest, Cisse faced murder, attempted murder, and several weapons charges. Number 7. Marie Laguerre. Surveillance footage of a confrontation on a street in Paris caused considerable outrage online in 2018 after a young woman was harassed and assaulted. Engineering student Marie Laguerre, aged 22, was passing by a cafe patio when her path intersected with that of a man who allegedly made lewd comments and wolf-whistled her. Laguerre reportedly told him to shut up and they both continued walking in separate directions. Moments later, the man grabbed an ashtray from one of the cafe's tables and threw it over the patio at Laguerre, narrowly missing her. He then walked back to the young woman and, without warning or provocation, forcefully struck her across the face. The attacker retreated and others from the patio intervened, including a man who'd armed himself with a chair to ensure he maintained his distance. The 25-year-old aggressor, only identified as Firas M under French court rules, was subsequently arrested and given 6 months in prison, along with a further 6-month suspended sentence. Firas wasn't charged with sexual harassment, as investigators found evidence of it to have been insufficient, but was ordered to undergo psychological treatment and attend a course on sexual violence awareness. He didn't have a fixed address at the time of the attack on Laguerre and had already served time in prison for violence against his mother and for pimping. As news of the assault began to circulate, Laguerre was praised for standing up to her harasser, and she subsequently started a website where other victims could share their stories. The incident also added to the momentum of a pre-existing push for French legislation that would see catcallers and aggressively lecherous individuals facing potential on-the-spot fines of over $750. Number 6. Aisha Walker. On November the 4th of 2017 in Winnipeg, Canada, a transgender woman was brutally attacked following a confrontation on a bus. 28-year-old Aisha Walker intervened after seeing that an intoxicated man was grinding up against a young female passenger, whom Walker had deduced was a stranger to her. A verbal confrontation ensued, to which a third man, whom up to that point had been completely uninvolved in the exchange, reacted by telling Walker and the man she'd accused of harassment to shut up and sit down. The former maintained that she'd only been trying to protect a fellow passenger, but the third man suddenly punched her in the face. The attacker then got off the bus at the University of Winnipeg and fled the scene. Walker reported the assault to the bus driver, who subsequently cleared the vehicle and told her to file a police report. The forceful blow she'd sustained had left her with a black eye, as well as damage to 7 of her teeth, which were chipped or broken. The police informed Walker that Manitoba Health would cover her emergency dental surgery. On December the 12th of 2017, the authorities announced that they'd arrested the man suspected of having attacked her and charged him with assault causing bodily harm. Number 5. Amanda Nunes. At around 6:30 a.m. on August the 31st of 2020, Amanda Nunes was getting breakfast at a food stand in the city of Belford Roxo in the Brazilian state of Rio de Janeiro. 30-year-old Nunes overheard a couple making cruel comments about her weight and confronted them. A heated verbal argument ensued, during the course of which, according to local authorities, Nunes slapped the man in the face. The latter then suddenly brandished a pistol and shot Nunes in the head. She was rushed to the hospital and subsequently transferred to an ICU, where she succumbed to her gunshot injury a few hours later. In the incident's immediate aftermath, activists were filmed walking through the streets while wearing t-shirts with Nunes' face and demanding justice for her. As of the latest updates on the shooting, which Nunes' social media followers labeled a cowardly act, local police were still reviewing CCTV footage and talking to witnesses in an effort to identify her killer. Number 4. Andrew Turner. On August the 28th of 2021, Kelsey O'Hara and her friends were out drinking in Bridlington, England. A confrontation ensued between 19-year-old O'Hara and Andrew Turner, aged 58. The former asked that the man apologize for a previous incident in which he'd allegedly bumped into one of her friends. Turner refused, to which O'Hara reacted by throwing her purse onto the ground and attacking him. O'Hara, whom multiple local media outlets would later describe as a baby-faced teenager, punched Turner in the head. She delivered the strike with such force that the man was knocked unconscious. He collapsed and hit the pavement with the back of his head, sustaining a cut of 5 to 7 inches. Turner tried getting to his feet upon regaining consciousness, but was initially unable to do so. Police and paramedics arrived at the scene, but he refused to be taken to a hospital, as his injuries were not believed to have been that severe. Within days, on September the 3rd, Turner passed away and the authorities launched a murder investigation. They didn't disclose the cause of the man's death, but citing evidence from a pathologist and a neuropathologist determined that O'Hara's punch hadn't been a factor in his passing. The teenager, who admitted wounding, was spared jail time in early April of 2022 and instead sentenced to a 6-month curfew. Number 3. Juliet Powell Brown. 47-year-old Juliet Powell Brown was parked in a sedan along with her husband and another woman at a discount tire store in Aurora, Colorado. On August the 7th of 2018, at around 5:30 p.m., Henry Wardwell backed his GMC pickup truck, which had a camping trailer in tow, into the sedan. 48-year-old Wardwell told the trio that he would be getting his insurance and registration so that they could deal with the small fender bender. It would later emerge that the man didn't have insurance and was also driving without a valid license. Once he was back in his pickup truck, Wardwell drove off, prompting Powell Brown and her family to follow him until he eventually stopped farther down the street. The woman and her husband jumped out of their vehicle to confront him, approaching the pickup truck on the driver's side. Wardwell then turned his steering wheel, accelerated, and tried to get away by making a U-turn. In doing so, he struck Powell Brown, causing her to fall and become trapped under the wheels of the trailer. Wardwell then continued driving, dragging the woman behind his vehicle until she was freed in the area of South Chambers Road, where her mangled body was subsequently found. Powell Brown, who local media outlets reported was a newlywed, was later pronounced dead. Wardwell was ultimately sentenced to 18 years in prison after being convicted of 5 counts, including leaving the scene of an accident involving death, a Class 3 felony, and vehicular manslaughter. Number 2. Orm. A lover's spat involving 3 people from Phetchabun, Thailand, devolved into an attack involving a sword in April of 2022. As reported by local media, 40-year-old Orm had been having relations with a couple only identified as Air and his wife Note, aged 35 and 38 respectively. The latter two stopped meeting up with Orm roughly a year prior after she'd asked if her Bangkok-based boyfriend could join them. In the meantime, Orm broke off her relationship with the man and began pestering the couple to resume their prior arrangement, which Air and Note repeatedly refused. After yet another rejection in early April, Orm went to their home armed with a sword. The couple filmed the ensuing confrontation as they took shelter behind their front door. After pulling the blade from its hilt, Orm rammed it through a crack between the front door and the door frame. The razor-sharp sword was only inches from Air's face, with the tip pointed towards Note, but fortunately no one was hurt. The woman eventually left the scene following repeated pleas from Air. The couple later spoke to the media and claimed to have had some really great times with Orm in the past. After they'd stopped seeing her, however, they noted that she kept pressuring them for intercourse and harassing them, which they attributed to her developing feelings for one or both of them. Note and Air didn't report it to the police because they wanted to keep their lifestyle private. They hoped that by sharing the footage of the sword attack, Orm's newfound notoriety would deter her from further harassment. Number 1. Jamie Rathburn. In 2019, a South Carolina woman was arrested after sneaking into an elementary school and confronting children who'd reportedly been bullying her son. The Greenville County Sheriff's Office was alerted to the incident by other parents who'd seen a video that Jamie Rathburn had uploaded to her Facebook. In the clip, the woman ranted about she'd made her way to her son's classroom and, unsure who'd actually been responsible for the alleged bullying, threatened a group of children that they better stop messing with her kid. Surveillance footage confirmed that on May the 17th, she'd entered the Greenbrier Elementary School without performing the mandatory signing at the office. There was no audio in the video, but statements from witnesses maintained that Rathburn then began berating the children, aged 8 to 9, as they were lined up in the hall and waiting for class to begin. Rathburn was arrested a few days later and charged with non-student interfering, disrupting or disturbing schools. The woman was banned from the learning institution's property. While she later apologized and claimed that her emotions had gotten the better of her, Rathburn criticized what she'd deemed a poor handling of the bullying incident by the school.
Number 7. Anna Kimai. A 24-year-old woman was charged with assault after she took off her mask and purposefully coughed in her Uber driver's face. Anna Kimai and 2 other female passengers became embroiled in a heated argument with their driver, Shubaka Kadka, on March the 7th of 2021. The situation devolved into a physical altercation after Kadka kicked his passengers out of the car. The driver had picked the 3 women up in San Francisco, California, at about 12:45 in the afternoon. A few minutes had passed before the driver realized that one of the passengers wasn't wearing a face mask, and he pulled his vehicle to the side of the road. He told the women that he couldn't continue the Uber ride unless all 3 of them were wearing masks. In compliance with state and local public health mandates, the passengers became belligerent, and Kimai then took off her mask to shout at Kadka As the 32-year-old Uber driver attempted to ignore the women's verbal onslaught, Kimaya leaned over the driver's seat and coughed aggressively in his direction. She then pulled off his mask and stole his phone, to which Kadka responded by yelling at them to leave his vehicle. He eventually got his phone back and the passengers exited the car. The entire dispute was captured by the driver's dashboard camera. During the video recording, one of the women can be heard shouting, "I've got corona," as they continued to taunt Kadka. Kimaya turned herself into the San Francisco Police Department, and she was ultimately charged with attempted robbery and assault. Number 6. Heidi McKinney. Heidi McKinney was arrested on May the 8th of 2016 at Portland International Airport after having arrived there from Las Vegas on an Alaska Airlines flight. McKinney was accused of having smuggled alcohol on board and licking and groping a fellow female passenger. According to the assistant U.S. attorney, McKinney had acted with intent to humiliate and harass the victim. Not only had she groped the victim, she also bullied her to drink the alcohol that she had snuck on the plane with her, took photos of the victim, attempted to kiss the victim, and called the victim poor while bragging about her own supposed wealth. According to McKinney, she had recently been to rehab to battle her drinking habit, something that could explain her deplorable behavior. A fellow passenger also declared that McKinney was indeed drunk. McKinney was facing 10 years in federal prison and a fine of $250,000, but ultimately received 3 years probation. Number 5. Danuka Silva. In October of 2019, an Uber passenger was fatally struck by a police car after he fled the vehicle he was in and ran across the 101 freeway in California. The deceased was later identified as Danuka Silva, aged 30. According to the Uber driver, Silva had gotten into an altercation with another passenger sitting in the front seat. The two men had reportedly been picked up in West Hollywood at approximately 3 a.m. During the subsequent Uber ride, they began physically fighting with one another. The conflict escalated after Silva began choking the other passenger. The driver attempted to break them up, but the two men, who were purportedly friends, continued punching each other repeatedly. The Uber driver eventually pulled his vehicle over to the side of the highway and contacted the police. As they awaited the arrival of law enforcement, Silva exited the car, jumped over the center divider, and began roaming the eastbound lanes of the roadway. He then stepped in front of a patrol vehicle that was responding to the altercation which had occurred inside the Uber. Paramedics were dispatched to the scene, but Silva ultimately passed away from the injuries he'd sustained in the collision. The officer suffered minor lacerations to his left arm. Number 4. Anthony Devontae Williams. On the morning of February the 3rd of 2020, a 33-year-old man opened fire on passengers of a Greyhound bus in Kern County, California. A witness later told the authorities that he noticed the shooter, a Maryland man named Anthony Devontae Williams, attempting to speak to everyone on board the bus before his outburst. The passengers ignored Williams, and the man subsequently raised his voice while talking to himself. The situation escalated when a man got up to use the bathroom and Williams ordered him to sit back down. Williams then announced, "I'm gonna shoot," before firing indiscriminately in the direction of the helpless passengers. 5 people were injured, while one victim, identified as 51-year-old Lurbis Elena Vence, suffered multiple gunshot wounds and passed away at the scene. A passenger disarmed Williams and the bus driver rushed to the next exit, where he was then forced off the bus. Upon being notified of the attack, California Highway Patrol tracked the suspect down and arrested him without incident. Williams was ultimately found incompetent to stand trial and was referred to Kern Behavioral Health in order to undergo a mental health evaluation. He was reportedly deemed competent in November of 2021, and a hearing was scheduled for December the 2nd to review his case and determine the next steps in the legal proceedings. Number 3. Stella Ye. A college student was run over by 2 oncoming vehicles as she wandered across a San Diego freeway in the early morning hours of May the 12th of 2018. Stella Ye, aged 19, had reportedly been drinking with friends in the hours leading up to her death. She was too intoxicated to drive, so an Uber was called to pick the teenager up and take her back to her dorm on the San Diego State University campus. At one point during the ensuing ride, Ye vomited on the vehicle's dashboard. The driver promptly pulled off the freeway and ordered the young woman to exit the car. Ye conformed to the request and subsequently called for a second Uber ride. When the driver arrived at her location, he found her stumbling down the freeway ramp and reportedly refused to let her inside his vehicle. Minutes later, Ye staggered onto the highway and was struck by two cars driving in the southbound lanes of Interstate 805 at about 1:30 a.m. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Ye's family filed a lawsuit against Uber, claiming the two drivers involved failed to uphold their duty to properly care for the young woman. A superior court judge ruled that Uber's employees should have looked after Ye until she was discharged at a safe location. The company's assertion that they held no responsibility for Ye's death was rejected by a state court judge in San Francisco. Number 2. Dontarius McGee. A Lyft driver named Brandy Luttrell was kidnapped, robbed at gunpoint, and shot 7 times by a 17-year-old passenger of her vehicle. Luttrell had picked Dontarius McGee up from an apartment complex in Jackson, Mississippi on November the 2nd of 2021. Upon arriving at his destination, McGee pulled out a gun and ordered the driver to get into the back seat. He demanded Luttrell give him her debit cards, bank account information, as well as the passcode to her phone. Fearing for her life, Luttrell did as her armed passenger ordered. McGee then drove her Dodge Journey to a remote wooded area. As the Lyft driver crawled into the woods, the teenager proceeded to shoot her a total of 7 times. McGee fled the scene, leaving his wounded victim to bleed out in the middle of the forest. Luttrell miraculously survived the attack and managed to gather the strength to run to a nearby apartment complex. She was then taken to the University of Mississippi Medical Center, where she remained in recovery the following week. McGee was arrested later that evening at his place of work. He admitted to carrying out the attack and was charged with kidnapping, carjacking, and aggravated assault. Number 1. Vince Lee. A 22-year-old man on board a Greyhound Canada bus was beheaded and cannibalized by a fellow passenger on July the 30th of 2008. The victim was Tim McLean, a carnival barker from Winnipeg. He was returning home after working an event in Edmonton at the time of the brutal attack. Just before 7 p.m., the bus departed from a stop in Manitoba with a new passenger, a Chinese-Canadian man named Vince Lee, aged 40. Although he'd initially taken a seat near the front of the bus, Lee moved towards the back and sat next to McLean after a scheduled stop. McLean was sleeping with his headphones on when Lee suddenly pulled out a large knife and repeatedly plunged it into his neck and chest. The bus driver pulled over to the side of the road and fled the vehicle, along with the rest of the passengers. Lee locked the doors of the bus and then used his knife to decapitate McLean. He held the victim's severed head up to the window, displaying it to the horrified passengers standing outside. Afterwards, Lee returned to McLean's body and ate some of his flesh. Members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived at the scene at approximately 8:30 p.m. By that point, Lee was trapped inside the bus as the driver and 2 other passengers had barricaded the doors with a crowbar to prevent the perpetrator from escaping. The driver had also engaged the vehicle's emergency immobilizer in order to keep Lee from driving away. The suspect continued to consume portions of McLean's flesh while special negotiators attempted to communicate with him. The standoff lasted until 1:30 a.m. when Lee attempted to escape by breaking one of the bus's windows. He was shot with a taser and taken into custody. Parts of the victim's body had been scattered throughout the interior of the bus, while McLean's ear, nose, and tongue were found in Lee's pockets. Lee ultimately pleaded not guilty on account of mental disorder. Based on a recommendation by the psychiatrist assigned to the case, Judge John Scurfield ruled that Lee was not criminally responsible for the deadly attack. Lee spent 7 years at Selkirk Mental Hospital before he was eventually discharged in 2017. Number 6. Tyrese Simmons. On the evening of August the 14th of 2019, the police in Dallas, Texas, received reports of a shooting in the 3500 block of Munger Avenue. Upon their arrival, responding officers discovered that a young girl, identified as Brandonia Bennett, had been fatally shot in an attack of which she hadn't been the intended target. In the aftermath, investigators learned that the tragic incident had been precipitated by an ongoing feud between 2 aspiring rappers from the area that had escalated to violence following a venomous diss track. According to the police, 19-year-old Tyrese Simmons had been directly insulted in the lyrics of a song written by Benny Fountain, aged 17. The former retaliated against his hip-hop rival by attempting to gun him down, firing the shots that killed Bennett into the apartment where he believed Fountain resided. Simmons targeted the wrong unit, however, leading to the child's premature demise.
The shooter turned himself into the authorities and was charged with capital murder. In October of 2019, reports indicated that a Dallas County grand jury had found sufficient evidence to indict Simmons, as well as an accomplice named Devontae Benton, of the murder charges. As of recent updates, it was unclear whether the case's trial had yet gotten underway. Number 5. Rocky Rudolph Jr. On the morning of June the 29th of 2019, a Seminole County Sheriff's deputy pulled over a car traveling along County Road 46A near Interstate 4 in Florida. The officer, Deputy Aaron Blaze, proceeded to conduct a routine traffic stop, which reportedly stemmed from the vehicle's tinted windows. As was detailed in a subsequent press conference by Sheriff Dennis Lemmer, nothing out of the ordinary occurred initially, as the deputy engaged in a normal conversation with the motorist, identified as Rocky Rudolph Jr. The interaction escalated within a matter of seconds, as Blaze allegedly smelled marijuana and asked Rudolph to shut off his car's engine. The driver became belligerent and combative, at one point yelling and screaming at the deputy before putting the vehicle in gear and speeding off. Rudolph's attempt to escape the officer was complicated by the fact that the latter's arm had become lodged in the car's window, causing him to be dragged approximately 20 feet down the road. The motorist then came to a stop, at which point Blaze brandished his service weapon and ordered him to put his hands in the air. In defiance of the policeman's command, Rudolph accelerated forward once again, and Blaze was thrown from the vehicle only moments before it merged onto the highway. After eventually losing control of the car, Rudolph fled on foot. The authorities subsequently conducted a manhunt that lasted 8 hours, after which the suspect was found in the Longwood community. He was taken to a hospital for a wounded leg before being taken into custody on a charge of attempted murder of a law enforcement officer. It was reported that Rudolph had a history of fleeing from police and had accrued a total of 32 felony charges over the course of the previous several years. Number 4. Torrance Bowling Alley Shooting. Officers from the Torrance Police Department in California were sent to Gable House Bowl, a bowling alley in which a shooting had broken out on the night of January the 4th of 2019. Responding law enforcement came upon multiple gunshot victims, 3 of whom were ultimately pronounced dead at the scene. 2 men were taken to a local hospital for treatment, while 2 others reportedly sought their own medical care. Investigators spoke with eyewitnesses in an effort to ascertain what had triggered the deadly outbreak of violence, as well as who could be held responsible. Police used video footage from inside the establishment to identify 47-year-old Reginald Wallace as the case's prime suspect. The latter, a parolee who'd been convicted of first-degree murder as a juvenile in 1989, had reportedly fired the fatal rounds after an argument between 2 bowling alley patrons had escalated into a full-blown brawl involving 10 to 15 people. Upon his arrest, Wallace was charged with 3 counts of murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and 1 count of possession of a firearm by a felon. During his trial, the defendant argued that he'd been protecting himself after purportedly seeing one of his victims brandish a firearm. However, in conversations with a cellmate, Wallace allegedly admitted that he'd opened fire because he saw members of a rival gang among the brawlers and had sought to eliminate them. The man was ultimately found guilty of each count levied against him, although his conviction all but assured he'd spend the remainder of his life behind bars. Wallace's official sentencing hearing was scheduled to take place in September of 2022. Number 3. Perkerson Park Water Gun Fight. Police in Atlanta, Georgia were dispatched to Perkerson Park in the city's southwest on June the 1st of 2019 in response to a neighborhood water gunfight that had taken over the streets. It later emerged that the public event had been organized as part of the Guns Down, Water Guns Up movement, aimed at bringing communities together to protest gun violence. The participants had been engaged in a good-natured water gunfight, but officers were sent to the scene after the crowd had grown to approximately 500 in number, causing traffic to be blocked from passing through the congested street. It was reported that 8 officers in total responded to Perkerson Park to conduct traffic and crowd control, and as they did so, several members of the event began dousing them with their water guns. The situation escalated further when people allegedly started throwing rocks and coolers at members of law enforcement,
as well as other first responders, some of whom had been dispatched to aid a woman suffering from an unspecified medical emergency. The police eventually began impounding parked cars to clear up the roadway, at which point the crowd dispersed. While many online commenters were quick to defend those who sprayed water at the officers, the Atlanta Police Department released a statement in which they detailed the situation's potential dangers, stating that the event quickly grew beyond entertainment and became a safety hazard. Number 2. Terrence Huff Jr. Shortly after midnight on July the 5th of 2007, Ohio firefighter Terrence Huff Jr. stormed out of his Cleveland residence with a firearm in hand to confront his next-door neighbors about the noise they were making during an Independence Day celebration. The 35-year-old man, a 12-year veteran of the fire department, unloaded a barrage of bullets at the partygoers, striking 5 of them, 3 of whom ultimately passed away from their resulting injuries. The police were called to the scene and Huff was placed under arrest, whereupon he was charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder. The authorities subsequently recovered a total of 7 handguns from the suspect's home, including the one used in the deadly shooting, as well as 5 long guns. In the incident's aftermath, details regarding an apparent feud between the Huff family and their neighbors began to emerge. Between 2003 and 2005, Huff's wife, Regina, reportedly called the police multiple times to complain about the people living next door. The content of her various complaints ranged from loud music being played to underage drinking and drug use. The veteran firefighter allowed the tension that existed between his household and the adjacent one to boil over on the night of the tragic episode that claimed the lives of 3 people, all in their 20s or early 30s. In 2008, Huff was convicted on the murder charges and consequently sentenced to life imprisonment with no chance of parole. Number 1. Chan Arslan. On October the 5th of 2021, Englishman Matthew Borman was brutally stabbed to death on his front lawn in the Gloucestershire village of Walton, Cardiff. The 43-year-old victim, a father of 3, had over the course of multiple years been embroiled in an ongoing dispute with his confrontational neighbor, Chan Arslan, regarding parking on a shared driveway. Although the impetus of their long-standing feud was rather trivial in nature, Borman's wife had previously made a statement to police detailing the verbal abuse and threats to which their neighbor had subjected them. Leading up to the situation's violent breaking point, the woman had reportedly made it clear to local authorities that they'd become concerned that Arslan might try to harm them, as he'd allegedly vowed at one point, "I will kill him," in reference to Borman. On the day of the incident, Arslan sat on his critically injured victim's body and proceeded to light a cigarette. The brazen and flippant act prompted Borman's wife to try and drag the assailant off of his body, at which point Arslan allegedly knifed her in the leg before breaking into the home of another nearby resident named as Peter Marsden. The latter was stabbed 8 times during Arslan's frenzied outburst, but he fortunately survived the attack. In the ensuing legal proceedings, the crazed neighbor denied murder and instead pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, citing his supposed personality disorder as the reason he'd lashed out with such ferocious violence. However, psychiatrists brought in to testify in court indicated that Arslan had been in total control of his actions on the day of the murder, and he was thus found guilty. In the summer of 2022, the man was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 38 years. Number 9. Gerald Melton. An aspiring singer-songwriter from Nashville, Tennessee, was involved in a violent altercation with a homeless man in the early morning hours of August the 26th of 2017. As per subsequent reports, 54-year-old Gerald Melton was attempting to sleep on the sidewalk near Music Row when he became disturbed by exhaust fumes and loud music coming from a Porsche SUV. The man requested that the driver, 26-year-old Katie Quackenbush, move the vehicle elsewhere. She refused, and the two then became embroiled in a heated shouting match, which eventually led to Quackenbush climbing out of the SUV with a firearm in hand. By that point, Melton had already begun walking back towards his sleeping area, as he later told investigators. When an armed Quackenbush approached him, however, the argument continued, culminating with 2 shots being fired into the man's abdomen. Neither Quackenbush nor the female passenger in her car contacted the authorities about the injured victim. Instead, an uninvolved bystander who came upon Melton wounded on the sidewalk alerted emergency responders. He was taken to Vanderbilt University Medical Center, where he remained in critical condition for weeks before his eventual release. During questioning, Quackenbush claimed to have fired the gun as a warning to Melton, whom she accused of approaching her threateningly. She was nevertheless charged with attempted first-degree murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. In April of 2022, Quackenbush was found guilty of the lesser charge of reckless endangerment, and her sentencing hearing was scheduled for October later that year. Number 8. Jack Burney. Englishman Jack Burney was knocked unconscious during an altercation on Cowper Street in Northampton at around noon on April the 23rd of 2022. The 32-year-old was hospitalized before ultimately succumbing to his injuries a couple of days later. Northamptonshire police subsequently arrested 25-year-old Mark Peter Dowling on suspicion of murder. Court records indicated that Burney and Dowling had been amongst a group of men who'd gotten into a street fight that afternoon. 2 other men were arrested in connection to the incident but were released on bail pending further investigation. As of the latest updates on the matter, investigators had called upon the general public, seeking any witnesses that might possess information that could help them gain a clearer picture of the events that led to Burney's premature death. Number 7. Lloyd Gaudry. 2 warring groups of people gathered for a street fight near the 2100 block of 16th Street South in Great Falls, Montana, on March the 23rd of 2018. The dispute reportedly stemmed from previous altercations between several members of each group. At one point during the ensuing mayhem, 45-year-old Lloyd Gaudry was struck in the neck with what was described as a hatchet. He suffered a single, sharp force wound that fractured his cervical spine and transected his left vertebral artery, killing him instantly. Local police subsequently conducted interviews with eyewitnesses who identified 35-year-old James Michael Parker as the individual wielding the hatchet, which it would later emerge he'd purchased a few weeks earlier. At the time of the street brawl, Parker had reportedly been out on probation for a previous conviction. Following Gaudry's slaying, he was taken back into custody on charges that included assault with a weapon, witness tampering, and deliberate homicide. In September of 2021, Parker was convicted of the aforementioned criminal counts. 2 months later, he was consequently sentenced to an aggregate total of 65 years in prison. Number 6. Carla Harrison. Early on April the 4th of 2015, Baltimore police were called to the 2800 block of Edmondson Avenue after receiving reports of a street brawl between several people. Responding officers broke up the 2 groups of women who'd been arguing with one another. However, about 15 minutes later, the same officers came upon a large group of people congregating outside of a carry-out restaurant. They found a pair of female victims suffering from apparent stab wounds. The first, a 36-year-old woman, presented with severe injuries to her stomach and was quickly rushed to the hospital, where she ultimately died a short time later. The second victim, a 30-year-old woman, had reportedly been stabbed in the leg and was hospitalized with what were described as non-life-threatening injuries. Upon launching a full-scale investigation into the matter, the police reviewed surveillance footage that showed the 36-year-old victim, named as Carla Harrison, getting into an altercation with 22-year-old Michelle Johnson inside the restaurant. At some point, Johnson brandished some type of sharp object with which she began slashing Harrison, inflicting her mortal wounds in the process. The young woman was consequently arrested and charged with first-degree murder, to which she pleaded guilty. In Baltimore's circuit court, Johnson was handed down a life sentence, suspended for all but 35 years, followed by 3 years of probation. Number 5. Paul Duran. On the night of July the 20th of 2022, emergency responders were called to the scene of a violent street fight between 2 men in South Gippsland, a local government area in Victoria, Australia. Upon their arrival, paramedics were reportedly unable to revive a man who'd been left critically injured by the altercation. 39-year-old Paul Duran was thus pronounced dead at the scene. The man's death was the result of a reported street brawl with an individual whose identity hadn't been determined as of the latest developments. Homicide detectives canvassed the streets of the tight-knit country town of Foster, where the incident occurred, in an attempt to gather more information about the events that led to Duran's premature demise. It was reported that a 43-year-old man had been taken into custody in connection to the fatal street fight, but was later released pending further inquiries. Number 4. Jordan Moazami. Amateur UK boxer Jordan Moazami was killed in an alleyway near a Birmingham golf club on the evening of April the 24th of 2019. 18-year-old Moazami had reportedly gotten into an argument with 2 other teens, one of whom proceeded to pull out a knife and stab him in the neck after chasing him down. Emergency medical services were called to the scene, where they pronounced the young man dead. The individuals with whom Moazami had become entangled were later identified as 19-year-old Mashoud Giwa and Hamed Hussein, aged 18. Only hours before the deadly incident, Giwa had reportedly received a suspended jail sentence in connection to knife possession charges. Then later that night, Giwa and Hussein got into a fight with Moazami that reportedly centered around their drug use. The victim had been a respected member of the community who'd served as a peer mentor at Continental Star Football Club, steering vulnerable youngsters away from crime. Following a criminal trial at Birmingham Crown Court, Giwa was acquitted of manslaughter and released from custody, while Hussein was convicted of murder. He was consequently sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 19 years. Number 3. Connor Cleave. In April of 2014, 2 friends from Fife in eastern Scotland got into a vicious fight on the streets of Metherhill. 17-year-old Connor Cleave was reportedly stabbed in the heart by Jamie Wishart, aged 22, after the pair's heated row turned violent. Although the catalyst of their dispute wasn't immediately disclosed to the public, Scottish police revealed that the victim suffered a puncture wound to his heart that ultimately proved fatal. Cleave's mother, who'd been a witness to her son's killing, testified in court that she'd seen a big hole in his chest as he lay dying in the streets that fateful night. Another witness claimed to have seen Wishart plunge something shiny into Cleave's chest. Wishart initially faced a murder charge but was ultimately found guilty of culpable homicide following his trial at the High Court of Glasgow. The young man was consequently jailed for 10 years. Number 2. Moiz Udin. At about 2:40 a.m. on July the 11th of 2018, a street fight in the Chinese city of Nanjing between a local man and an international student from Pakistan turned deadly. The student, identified as 26-year-old Moiz Udin, had just left a popular bar with a female friend shortly after the conclusion of the World Cup semi-final match between France and Belgium. He then got into an argument with a man identified only by his family name, Kong, which ultimately led to the police getting called to the scene. When officers arrived, they came upon Udin lying in the street in critical condition after having been stabbed in the chest and back and beaten to a bloody pulp with a bike lock. Udin succumbed to his injuries before he could be transported to the hospital. The police subsequently determined that the young man had been killed by 28-year-old Kong after their row had escalated to violence. CCTV footage of the incident showed Kong crossing the street to confront Udin after he and his companion exited the bar. The police revealed that the man had become enraged because the international student had made light contact with his scooter earlier that night. In June of 2020, Kong was sentenced to death after being convicted of intentional homicide. Number 1. Andrei Drakev. In August of 2017, an MMA fighter got into a bare-knuckle street fight with a champion powerlifter in Khabarovsk, Russia. According to eyewitness testimony, 26-year-old Anna Alagvarenov had been taunting professional lifter Andrei Drakev about how MMA was the superior test of physical prowess to weightlifting. Drakev ultimately agreed to a fight to settle the dispute, which subsequently took place at a nearby intersection. As was captured on cell phone video, the mixed martial artist at one point delivered a vicious roundhouse kick to Drakev's head, causing him to collapse to the pavement. Alagvarenov then proceeded to bash the powerlifter's head repeatedly as he laid motionless on the ground. The ruthless assault eventually killed Drakev, and Alvarez subsequently went on the run. After a manhunt was launched by Russian police, the MMA fighter turned fugitive gave himself up to the authorities and was charged with homicide in connection to Drakev's death. Following a trial that lasted for over a year, Alvarez was found guilty and consequently sentenced to 18 years behind bars. Number 9. Lawanda Brown. On May the 28th of 2018, Tony Brown was found on the floor of his Florida home in a pool of his own blood after being shot by his 57-year-old wife. Lawanda, the business director, also in his late 50s, had been shot in the back of the head following a minor dispute over a Google search. Tony and Lawanda owned a consulting agency together and had been working on a project. Investigators later revealed that the latter felt her partner had spoken to her in a mean tone of voice while expressing his dissatisfaction with her internet search methods. Enraged by his attitude, she subsequently shot him in the back of the head with a .38 caliber gun they owned. As he walked out of the room, Lawanda later claimed that seeing him walk away was the last thing she remembered, and her memory of what happened next became a blur. When officers arrived at their home, they found Tony alive but in critical condition and called to have him airlifted to a hospital. He received emergency surgery and was released a week after recovering. Lawanda was charged with attempted first-degree murder and taken into custody, where she was held on $500,000 bond. Number 8. Daniel Malone and Terry Thomas. On June the 14th of 2021, a woman named Ivana Jenkins was ambushed and murdered by two men following an argument at an Indiana gas station. Jenkins was standing in line inside the gas station when 19-year-old Daniel Malone and 23-year-old Terry Thomas walked in, visibly armed. They purposely cut in front of her in line, to which Jenkins took exception and reacted by saying that she wasn't afraid of their guns. The two men left the store and waited for her to exit. When she did, they approached her aggressively, and Malone slapped her in the face. Jenkins fought back and began to throw punches at the men. In an effort to defend herself, she fell to the ground in the process, at which point Thomas shot her. He fled the scene in a vehicle while Malone took off on foot, but the police had already been called. When an ambulance arrived at the station, Jenkins was rushed to a nearby hospital where she was pronounced dead. After analyzing the building's surveillance footage, police identified Thomas and Malone as their suspects. They also found a pendant at the crime scene that was traced back to Thomas, and which had likely been pulled off his neck by Jenkins in the struggle. Both men were ultimately taken into custody, and as of the latest updates on the case, pleaded not guilty to the murder charges. Number 7. Paul Akinyoy. Friends Paul Akinyoy and Jordan Wright got into a fight following a WhatsApp group chat dispute on April the 19th of 2017. What had started out as the two men trading insults eventually led to them challenging each other to a physical fight in southeast London. 19-year-old Wright showed up to the confrontation unarmed, while under the impression that it was a fist fight, but 20-year-old Akinyoy came with a knife. After an initial scuffle, Akinyoy stabbed Wright multiple times, and he succumbed to his injuries on the same day. Wright's mother, Catherine Alade, later revealed that her son's autism had rendered him unable to fully understand the dangers of a street altercation. Akinyoy was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 21 years. Number 6. Kevin Batchelor. On May the 23rd of 2020, friends Kevin Batchelor and George Allison got into an altercation at a barbecue in Havant, England. The row and brawl that ensued resulted in 26-year-old Batchelor killing the other man. Fellow partygoers later testified to seeing the pair getting along and even taking pictures together until a verbal dispute between them broke out in the kitchen of the home. That's when they started to physically attack each other, before Batchelor got hold of a carving knife and stabbed 21-year-old Allison through his upper left shoulder. The resulting wound was nearly 7 inches deep, and Allison suffered extreme blood loss, to which he succumbed shortly thereafter. Covered in blood, Batchelor fled the scene on a bicycle and rushed to his sister's home for assistance. There, 34-year-old Haley Batchelor and her friend Barry Baker helped Kevin dispose of the murder weapon, wash his clothes, and gave him a change of clothing and shoes to help him avoid getting arrested. Despite their efforts, he was taken into custody later that same night, subsequently maintaining that he'd acted in self-defense. Police had found traces of blood on the shoes he'd worn at the barbecue, and the carving knife he'd used to kill Allison was found several weeks later in a storm drain. On June the 4th of 2021, he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 18 years served. Both Haley Batchelor and Barry Baker were found guilty of assisting an offender and were each sentenced to 3 years in prison. Number 5. Tonica Miller. An Indianapolis woman shot her boyfriend of 5 years in the face following an argument about cheating on May the 27th of 2022. Tonica Miller, aged 32, and 41-year-old Deshawn Roscoe shared an apartment together with their 2 young children. After putting their children to bed, they decided to go to a playground within their apartment complex to have intimate relations on a blanket. They were captured by surveillance cameras leaving their apartment at 12:50 a.m. Miller was carrying a handgun, which she later claimed to have brought for protection since it was dark outside. After having intimate relations, the couple got into an argument about Miller cheating on Roscoe, which prompted her to walk away and leave him behind at the playground. Surveillance video captured the woman returning to her apartment, only to make her way back to the playground just a minute later in her car. She exited the vehicle to let Roscoe get in the driver's seat. Still upset over the previous conversation, the man shoved her, and in retaliation, she hit him in the right shoulder. Miller still had the gun in her hand at the time, and it went off as she struck him, releasing a bullet directly into the man's cheek. Miller ran into her building to call the police and then returned outside to try to help her boyfriend by applying pressure to his gunshot wound. Unfortunately, when police arrived, they pronounced him dead at the scene. Miller was arrested and her 2 young children were taken by the Department of Child Services. She was charged with reckless homicide and 2 counts of neglect of a dependent. Number 4. Hannah Ryan Johal. On June the 14th of 2014, teenager Stanley Harrison died after being stabbed in the neck with a knife in Daventry, England. On the night of his murder, Harrison was picked up by his childhood friend, 18-year-old Hannah Ryan Johal, to carpool to a party together. Once the party was over, they returned to Johal's home with a 3rd friend, Reese Hamad, and continued drinking while they watched TV. The mood shifted when Harrison refused to give Johal a cigarette, leading to a verbal argument that escalated into a physical fight. Johal then went into the kitchen and retrieved an 8-inch kitchen knife to use against Harrison. Hamad intervened and tried to get his friends to stop fighting. In the scuffle, Johal fell to the floor, which gave Hamad a chance to kick the knife away from him before pushing Harrison towards the door, encouraging him to leave. As the teenager turned to exit, Johal, having regained his knife, charged him and stabbed him in the neck. Harrison sustained a severed blood vessel that led to him bleeding profusely as he stumbled and collapsed into the hallway. The police and emergency services were called, but Harrison died in the hospital the following day from complications associated with severe blood loss. Johal was arrested and charged with murder but denied that he'd intentionally stabbed his childhood friend. An investigation revealed that both Johal and Harrison were heavily inebriated and had traces of cocaine in their systems, which a judge determined had contributed to the fatal fight. Johal was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in jail. Number 3. Mason Trevor Toney. A pro-Trump construction worker was killed by his anti-government employee at a construction site after they'd gotten into a heated political argument on January the 20th of 2020. Mason Trevor Toney fatally stabbed his friend and boss, 28-year-old William Knight, with a pointed shovel before fleeing the scene in the latter's pickup truck. When Florida police arrived at the site, they found Knight's dead body, which had been partially covered with an American flag. Police were quickly able to track down Toney, which led to a pursuit that ultimately ended with him crashing the stolen pickup. He was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder and was held without bond. Number 2. Warren Little. On January the 23rd of 2016, a British man strangled his wife with a phone cord following an argument over money. 52-year-old Warren Little was living in Mallorca, Spain, when his wife, Lisa Little, aged 49, came to visit him from London. Warren called the emergency services 2 days after the woman's arrival, and paramedics found her dead at his home. Little's autopsy revealed that her cause of death was asphyxia due to strangulation. Warren was arrested that same day and taken in for questioning. Investigators asked him directly if he'd strangled his wife with a mobile phone cable, to which he answered yes. However, just a day later, Warren's story changed as he told a judge in a hearing that Lisa had choked to death while they'd engaged in a sadomasochistic role play, which she'd allegedly suggested, and that her death had been completely accidental. The claim wasn't consistent with what he told the police on at least 2 different occasions. As part of a plea deal, he eventually confessed that he'd killed her following an alcohol-induced outburst of rage about her wanting money that he wouldn't give her. Prosecutors were seeking a 20-year prison sentence for a murder conviction, but his confession got him a lesser charge of homicide and 12 years in prison. The Littles' daughter, 21-year-old Demi Nicole, filed for a restraining order against her father that would prohibit him from coming within 19 miles of her and her young son for the next 22 years. She also told the court that her mother had been a victim of domestic violence at her father's hands and had sued him for about $180,000 in the past. Number 1. Eleanor Stern. On December the 12th of 2015, a Florida woman kicked a state police officer at a Deerfield Beach Department of Motor Vehicles after getting into a row with a department employee. Video shot by another DMV goer showed 31-year-old Eleanor Stern having a heated verbal argument with the unnamed employee at the counter. An officer was consequently called over to remove her from the building. Stern was seen on video kicking the officer, who then began to wrestle with her on the ground as she continued to attack him. He struggled to handcuff Stern as she thrashed uncontrollably on the ground. The enraged woman was able to get up and away for a moment as she screamed profanities and insults at the officer. He was eventually able to get a hold of her and remove her from the building. Stern was charged with resisting arrest but was released after posting a $100 bond. Thanks for watching. Would you rather get chased by 3 American Bully XL dogs for a day, or live forever with a maniac who could snap at any moment in time? Let us know in the comments section below.